Hello, welcome to World Denver Talks, where today we're talking with retired U.S. Navy Admiral Dennis Blair, former Director of National Intelligence in 2009 and 2010, and in 2002, when he retired from the Navy, was Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Forces in the Pacific. It's a great honor to meet you, Admiral.
Nice to be here, Cynthia. A long way from the water, but a good town.
And right now, as the head of the Sasakawa Society, is it?
Sasakawa Peace Foundation.
Peace Foundation. You're taking a look at security and other issues between Japan and the U.S., is that right? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Japan and the United States have been allies for 70 years, ever since the end of the war, in which the United States was really responsible for establishing a democratic system in Japan. And remember, back in the 70s and 80s, we thought Japan was Godzilla who was going to devour the United States, buying all our companies, buying property and everything. And then about 1990, Japan had a big real estate bubble that burst. And since then, their economy has been pretty stagnant, and they haven't really gone too far. Meanwhile, China has sort of become the big story in East Asia, 1.3 billion customers, growing its armed forces and all. So it's sort of overshadowed Japan. Now, Japan has a new Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was elected 2 years ago. And he is really, his slogan is "Japan is back." And he's really speaking for a lot of Japanese who think it's time to break out of this stagnation that they've had for 20 years, to play a bigger role on the world stage. And having worked in the Pacific a long time, I think that's right too. And I think if the United States and Japan, as big democracies, the most powerful democratic allies in that part of the world, can stay together and work for a peaceful, prosperous future for everyone there, that's a good thing for both countries. So that's sort of what we try to do at Sasakawa. And I think there's a great opportunity now with Japan coming back. The United States has made this rebalancing to Asia, sometimes called the pivot to Asia, the swing to Asia, that you may have heard about. Yes. So we are paying attention. Japan is coming back, and just a great opportunity, I think, to really set the framework in Asia: economics, security, values, so that that place can really take off. That's where most of the world's wealth is.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a trade agreement that has been in the works for a couple of years. We're recording here at the end of January, and apparently progress is being made. The president's point person on the Trans-Pacific Partnership feels as though that can be worked out soon. But there is still kind of pitched opposition to it from the Democrats in Washington, and perhaps other people who aren't sure of the details, which have been kept somewhat secret. What would you say to someone sitting here who is concerned this would not be the right move for the U.S. to make?
The trade negotiations are incredibly difficult, especially comprehensive ones like the TPP. And although in general terms, the Republicans are for free trade and Democrats are against it because of the union backing, and the Republicans are businessmen and so on.
Sort of traditional stances.
That's traditional, but
yes.
It's a lot more complicated than that, as I'm sure you appreciate. But the Trans-Pacific Partnership is really significant for a couple of things. I would say most significant is that it will really be the gold standard of free trade agreements. It has very strong environmental protection provisions. That is, it's often said that if we do a free trade agreement with a country that has lousy environmental environmental laws, has child labor, then there are a lot of people being exploited who then send cheap goods to the United States. That disadvantages American workers. The TPP has really the highest standards on environmental safety standards, labor laws, and so on of any, so that we can be sure that when we sign it and we trade with a country, that country has to observe basically the same regulations that American companies have to. So it really evens the playing field. Second big thing is that there's really a competition for economic who sets the economic rules in Asia and therefore the world. The Chinese system is very much based on a nationalist system domestically, give advantage to domestic producers, allow foreigners in, but limit them and try to learn from them, and then take over, compete, and kick them out. Overseas, they're very mercantilist. When they cut deals, it's for Chinese companies. And what the Trans-Pacific Partnership would do would really be to establish a free trading framework with high standards for the world. It would be led by the United States and Japan, which are two of the three biggest economies in the world. So it's really important for setting the rules and having us set them rather than other people set them. If you look at it from a narrow who wins, who loses point of view in the United States, it's hard to say that this is going to be earth-shaking. There will be some winners, some losers. Most respected economists think American consumers will be overall winners, that American agriculture will be an overall benefit because Asian countries have notoriously closed agricultural shops, Japan in particular. Most countries believe that we need to push Japan in particular on automobiles, where, if you look around the streets of the United States, Japanese companies are there. If you look around the streets of Japan, there are not many American cars there. So this sort of balance of interests is all being worked out. The final thing I'd say, Cynthia, is that there's a window on this. It's the U.S.-Japan negotiation is really going to be the key to it. The 10 other countries are much smaller, and it'll probably that probably can be worked out. But Japan just finished an election, so the Japanese Prime Minister has a window that he can move forward. The United States election season will begin, this fall of this year or so,
Hasn't it already begun?
or maybe right. It'll get really intense at fall of this year. So I think we have from now till about June or July of this year to really a window to do it with Japan, and then we can follow through on the others. So it's a big deal.
One idea behind it was to shore up the strength of these other countries, and so that China would not be such a huge force in the region. Now they talk about wanting to join the TPP?
It's very complicated. They are trying to set up their own trade agreements, somewhat in competition with TPP. However, Chinese business people are of a couple of minds on this, and the big progressive companies that want to compete internationally think they can compete fairly and want to be in the world market, and therefore they want China to join. It would be a stretch for China because there's some strong provisions about state-owned enterprises, which China has a lot of. It subsidizes pretty heavily, and the TPP would set pretty rigid standards so that state-owned enterprises cannot benefit unfairly from government subsidies and all. So those who run the state-owned enterprises in China would, I think, be a little bit more hesitant. Those who run the big international Chinese companies, Lenovo, Chinese offshore oil, the Chinese IT companies that are beginning to, they think they've gotten through the incubation phase, they can get out there and compete. They would think China would be a good idea. The other thing is that Chinese leaders, advanced Chinese leaders, sort of use international trade agreements to spur their own economies in ways that they know it has to be spurred. When China first joined the WTO back about 10 years ago, the explicit reason was to force Chinese economy to be competitive. The Chinese knew there was going to be a lot of suffering internally. Companies that were inefficient were going to have to get rid of people, were going to have to up their game, and that's what the Chinese leaders wanted. So they did it, and there's a certain amount of that in their desire of some Chinese to join the TPP. Let's get in the big leagues, play by big league rules. We can do that.
Be modern and so forth.
Yeah.
Does it also represent sort of a burden on China? I mean, a burden or a pressure anyway, the environmental considerations?
That would be big. That would be big. Challenges could be brought under TPP to Chinese companies who were, dumping chemicals on their grounds, who didn't have the right environmental protection for their workers in the factories. So it would. But interesting. That's one thing that I think unites Asia now. If you've been to China or had friends who went there recently, the air is just terrible, and Chinese citizens are beginning to say, "Wait a minute, we shouldn't." Well, yeah. Why should this be better? So I think that the environmental provisions of TPP would be an advantage that most Chinese, except some factory workers, factory owners who are shaving a few points off their profits by neglecting them would welcome, and I think they should.
And you're saying then you think China would step up and
I think
go
they
along
would.
with
Now
this?
it's when you have a 1.3 billion people, it takes a while to do it. But if you can start with the leading companies, if you work down, if you continue to do it, no country is perfect in these matters. But if they make the commitment, then the most egregious cases have to be taken care of, and gradually the practices increase.